Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're going to get into some new tech stuff today. I know it's been a minute since we put out a video, so I figured I would cover something that I've seen a lot on Reddit. I've seen it a lot on Facebook lately. We're going to cover how to set up triple screens and why triple screens might be a better fit for you than, say, VR, or maybe you're just looking to upgrade from that old single monitor that you've been rocking this whole time and you're ready to take that upgrade, but you're thinking that it's going to cost too much. We're going to get into everything triple screen related, the best way to do it, at least that I've found, yeah, see if we can't give you guys at least a little bit of help with setup from the time we install iRacing all the way to getting into the car. So let's jump on into the video and go take a look at what we're talking about here. Okay, so as you can see from the previous clip there, the whole idea is to get these triple monitors that we've got all working together and in one unison view, right? Before we get into that, some things that you want to look at is how much space do I have? This setup is with three 27-inch curved monitors. It comes out to a little bit under 5 feet in width, so keep that in mind. If you use 24-inch monitors, obviously it's gonna be a little bit smaller. What graphics card do we got? You know, what are we working with technical spec wise there? And if you're gonna have a fourth monitor like I have, where I put my Discord and stuff like that, is always helpful but not necessarily needed. So the one thing, and I've covered this in one of my previous videos with my how to get into sim racing, is you don't need super high-end monitors. All the monitors on this setup are 1080p monitors. The reason I say you don't need anything more than 1080p, trying to find a graphics card that will push enough, especially with iRacing, to get you good frame rates, is going to be expensive. If budget is the name of your game, I can tell you right now, without a doubt, a 3060 with triples, even a quad monitor, will do the job just fine. But I'll get to that here in just a minute. Like I said, these monitors, I actually got their ACER refurbs. You can get them on eBay. I'll put a link in the description below. Very nice monitor, 165 hertz, 1 millisecond latency. They're the ACER Nitros. I paid about $109 a screen. I know if you buy more than one at a time, they give you a little bit of a deal. They do come straight from the ACER shop, so it comes right from Texas straight to you. I had mine here in Michigan in about 3 days. So don't be afraid to look at stuff like that. Now, as far as graphics, it's all about level of detail, right? But maybe budget's a little bit of a concern. I use a 4070 Ti currently. I previously had a 3080. Robin now uses that over in her machine on a single monitor, and I'll show you that setup here as well. It's a 34-inch ASUS ultra wide. It actually was my first setup. Worked very well until I one day decided that I wanted to hook up 2 other monitors and went, I want to go triples. But you can do just fine on a single monitor for a very long time if that's in your budget. Her rig runs a 3080 currently, and it pushes about 200 frames without issue, and that's with everything set on high. So, you know, whatever you want to do there. Now you could go the 2K route. With me streaming, I tend to stay more towards the 1080p side, just because it's less taxing, and it really fits everything that I've got going. So, yeah, you don't have to have a 4090 Super, however you want to do it. You can do it on a 3060. I like to use JD McKaylee as a prime example. I helped him set his entire deal up. He uses the same screens I do, but he's running a 3060 Ti. It runs it just fine. Works really nice. I've sat in his rig as well, and you know, it works just as good as the 4070 Ti I have here. So you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to make this happen. Now, as you could see in the previous slide, you know, I am using a Trak Racer monitor stand. Makes things a little bit easier, gives me a little bit more form and function. Previously, I had this on a desk. You can do it that way as well. There's many different ways to pull this off, but the big thing that we're really looking for here is, how do we do the settings? What makes this all work? I have a great write-up that I will link as well in the bottom that helped me set mine up, and I'm going to kind of use that for our walkthrough. And what we're going to do is I'm going to, while we're on video here, I'm going to go ahead and default my graphics config. I have a copy of my INI file, and I will show you how to go through and set up the INI file correctly. I also have some links over to a couple of videos that Tommy Brandon has done that I will put in the description, that if you're an NVIDIA guy, you'll want to go through these settings. AMD guys, you can do it as well. It's just going to be in some different spots, and Tommy's really good with laying that out, but it'll help you get the most out of your graphics card for iRacing. We're going to go ahead and, like I said, I'm going to walk through. We're going to run the graphics config. We're going to reset this whole thing up from scratch, and then that way you guys can hopefully go forth and do and have the best setup that you can come up with for your setup. So now we're in iRacing. Go ahead and we're going to get this thing defaulted and ready to go as if it's a fresh install, which also, this is something that you should do after every major iRacing update, specifically at the season points, because it'll help with the way that it's configured and everything else. So make sure that you do this, like I said, about every season when they do the major release at the start of the season. So we're going to come down here. We're going to click on the little cogs down here to get into settings. And we're going to go ahead and go over to interface. And then we are going to hit the graphics config. And this will take a second. Now the main thing is figuring out what display is what. And this is where things can get a little confusing, because if we hit the drop down menu, it's just listed as display 1, 2, 3, and 4. I know, and I'll show you how I figured this out. We'll open the NVIDIA control panel. Okay, so now we've got the NVIDIA control panel opened up. This is how you're going to find out what each one of those monitors is. So we come over to multiple displays. Those numbers all correspond to each of these. The star denotes the primary display. And then, like I said, 1, 2, 3, and 4 is each one of the screens. I have a 4 monitor setup. So we're going to go ahead and base ours off of monitor 2. We'll come back to iRacing. Okay, so we hit the drop down. We go display 2, auto configure, and it's going to go ahead and do its thing. We know that this is a 1920 by 1080 screen. It's 165-ish hertz. So we'll go ahead and leave that as it is. We don't do anything else with it because we're going to do all of our settings once we get into iRacing. So with that, the graphics config is done. So we can go ahead and close it. Now, before we get into the INI file, the first thing that you want to do, we're going to come over here. We're just going to load up a test drive or test session. We'll jump in and I will show you the settings with that. Okay, so we're in iRacing at this point, but as you can see, things don't look normal, or at least to me they don't. I'm pulling down 232 FPS, which is crazy. You know, we're on one screen. And if we get into the car, you can see things are really skewed because obviously my settings are way different as compared to usual. I think actually our driving FOV is about 155 right now. So we're going to get out of the car here. There's going to be a couple of things we're going to do first. So we come over here to options. We go to graphics, and I'm going to just get my wheel out of the way here. Now there's two things we're going to do, and then we're going to bounce back out of iRacing to bounce back in. So we need to make sure that we're not in full screen, and we need to be in borderless mode, so we got to make sure the border is off. We're also just going to go ahead and turn off SPS because we're not going to be running VR. And that's pretty much it for this part at first. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to click done. We're going to go ahead and quit the session because at this point, we're going to go ahead and do everything else in our INI file. So we'll go ahead and quit out of here. I will go ahead and get to the point where I'll show you guys where the INI file is, and we'll roll from there. Okay, so we've gotten out of iRacing at this point. I'm to the point where we're at where the INI file is, which is very easy to find. You'll wind up going over to your documents folder, and then once you're in documents, it's in iRacing. That's where the default install is. And then we come down to the bottom, and there's a Render DX11 monitor. So you can just right click, you go ahead and open that with Notepad. Okay, so this is where we're going to make any and all changes with the system. Now, with the last update at the start of the year, two things disappeared out of the config within iRacing. Those two things were the system memory as well as video memory to use. Not a horrible thing, but you need to know where they're at and how much to use in this instance, because it's not a round number. It actually comes out kind of funky when you get into certain numbers, and that's the whole thing for a later time, but I will link where to go to calculate that based on what your graphics card is. Now for this instance, we're going to open up Task Manager so that way we can get the info out of this machine so we can actually do that. So for this, I have 64 gigs of memory, I'm sorry, which iRacing can only use, I think it's like 32 or something like that. And then when it comes to the graphics card, we've got 12 gigs of dedicated GPU memory. Now for iRacing, they want you to use less, or was it, I think it's 20% less than maximum. So I usually stick to a solid round number, or pretty close to it. I set mine for 9, so it'll use 9 gigs when we're in game. As you can see, my graphics card's doing something, obviously, because I'm recording this currently, so there's some in use for that. But usually, if you don't have anything going on right now, this will be at about 0. So with that being said, okay, we know we've got 64 in this thing, and we're going to use 9 on this graphics card, so we'll go ahead and kick this out of the way. Now, where you set those numbers is right here. So because iRacing can only allow for 32 gigs, we go ahead and set to the maximum of 32,768. So that gets us our 32 gigs. Like I said, it's not a round number. So that's why that's something that you need to be aware of. As well as mine is set to 9597, which puts you at about 9 gigs of graphical usage as well. So that's huge. Now, the next part that we really need to worry about to get this set up, get it showing on all 3 screens, is actually going to be a little bit further down. Okay, so we come down here to display. And this is the one that we really want to mess with. Now, depending on your screen that you set as your main monitor, you may have to mess with windowed X and Y position. You'll set your refresh rate here if it hasn't been set already. And then you need to know your full screen width and height. Now, for this, they're 1920 by 1080 screens. So height is not an issue, but what you need to do is you need to take this 1920 and you need to multiply it by 3. So because we're spanning across 3 screens, right? So if we take that 1920 times it by 3, it comes out to 5760. So you'll change this to 5760. Oop. And then I also like to set the windowed width because I've had some weird issues before. So we'll go ahead and just set that as well. And then that should be the end of what we really need to change in here. Everything else, once we load in, we'll change that on the back end, which I took screenshots of all of my settings. So once we get back in, I will show you and explain to you why I went with those settings. So I'm going to go ahead and reload my copied version of my DX11 file because I've already got that set. And then once we come back, we'll be in sim. Okay, so now we're actually in sim. As you just saw, we've got all three screens working. It's a little bit hard for me to show you with the way that OBS is set up here, but we'll get into it. Now instead we're rocking about 165 frames a second, which is what I like to see because the screens are 165 hertz, so there's not really a point to go any different, right? But we're going to go into options. We'll come back to graphics. As you can see, at this point I'm set to that 5760 by 1080. Full screen's off, borders off, SPS is off. Like I said, I already had a copy of my INI file and everything to make this a little bit easier and quicker to go through. Generally, once you're in here, you won't see all of these options. To get that to happen, you've got to kick that slider over to max quality, and it'll let you change that. But the first thing that you've got to do before you do any of this is, once you're in and you've got your triple monitors set up, you're going to want to come back and click monitors. Now, all of mine are curved screens, so I set those to 3. You'll need to measure your bezel width because that bezel width will determine your skew between left and right monitors. And you may have to mess with that a little bit to get it laid out exactly where you want it, depending on your monitor, your bezel thickness and everything. And then your radius of curvature, if they're a curved screen, make sure that you get that off the box. There'll be a R value, mine are 1500. I set that and it does that as well. Now, one thing that I have found that helps quite a bit, especially with the frame rates, is rendering the scene using 3 projections and then enabling SMP and MVP. It really helps to get the frame rates where you want them. It makes everything a lot smoother. So you may have to play with that as well, whatever works best for your monitor. Now, the field of view calculator, this is one of those hot topics of debate that we're not going to get into here, but what I've found is set it best for what makes sense to you. You know, whatever feels more immersive and more natural. Everybody's got their own personal preference, and I say this with the whole idea of everybody sits differently in their own personal car. So whatever makes sense for you for field of driving when you are sitting in your rig and what is comfortable to you. A lot of people have a lot of varying opinions when it comes to that. I say set it up for you. It doesn't matter what somebody else thinks. To get the most out of this setup, 3 screens is taxing. Don't kid yourself. There's certain things you're going to have on. There's certain things you're going to have off. And a lot of it depends on what graphics card you've got. A couple of things to think about when setting this up. As you can see, my graphical settings, unless it's a pit object or a car, they're pretty low because there's certain things that you're not going to notice. 2-pass trees, high quality trees. I don't use any of that stuff when I'm racing. I also turn off object self-shadowing and dynamic objects, depending on the track, I will turn off. I also cap my frame rates at 165 so it doesn't go beyond the screen because there's just no point. Why use it if I don't need to, right? But I will turn on certain heat, haze, stuff like that so I can get a specific view that I'm looking for on stream, or you know, it might be helpful in race or something like that. But play with this, see what makes the most sense for you, what keeps you at the static FPS. Keep in mind, if you're a road guy, it's going to take a lot more. I know Watkins Glen, when I take these settings there, or Nürburgring for that matter, they both kill my frame rates. So you may have to play with pit objects and event and stuff like that. Maybe turn stuff off, turn stuff on. But these settings should work out really well for you, especially if you're rocking 27-inch screens. Like I said, with like a 3060 and up, it works out pretty well. All right, so let's jump into the car, and you can kind of see, at least out the front screen, it looks really well. And I'll throw a video on from in-car with an external camera, so you guys can see it a little bit better. So in-car, it looks really, really good. You know, you don't have too much that you can't see. Now, if you look right there at that bezel edge, you can see how the bars are off a little bit, and that's just from not having the correct bezel settings. And there's a little bit of adjustment that I've got to do with this triple monitor stand to get my monitors exactly level. But it's pretty close. You know, there's some people that'll get nitpicky. This side looks a lot better. And they're actually a more level setup. But this is kind of where you're at currently, at about 155 degrees field of view. So let's go ahead and make some changes, and then we'll pop up the new view. Okay, so if I set my wheel up based on where the wheel is in game, so I can see everything, and it looks like it matches. You see how much closer we are. We cut a little bit of the view out on the right side screen, but you're more in the car, if that makes sense. So again, it's all about how much immersion you want, and how close or how much you want to be able to see, right? If you want to be able to see more, we're going to back this back out, you know, probably take this back to that 155, which is about where I like to stay with my race cars for the most part. It gives me good left, good right view. As you can see here, you can see a little bit of the netting, but I also usually sit a lot closer in game than I would, you know, making this video right now. So keep that in mind. In different cars, you're going to adjust that field of view as well. You're going to maybe be closer, farther away. It all kind of depends. I know when I'm in a GTP car, I tend to move it back a little bit more so I can get that side view, because those A-pillars are fairly thick. So you want to make sure you can see around those. So that, guys, is pretty much triples in a nutshell. Like I said, I hope this explains a lot. I hope this helps a lot of people that aren't really 100% sure how to set them up, how to go about it, and in kind of the direction that they want to go. Keep in mind that, you know, even if you've got like a 4090 but you can't afford the extra cost of the screens, it's not going to hurt to shortchange on the screens. The only thing that I would suggest is make sure you get something that is about 100 FPS or higher. You don't want to do something with like a 60 FPS screen. I tried that when I first set this up, and man, it'll give you some headaches. So keep that in mind. If anybody has any questions, by all means, reach out to me. My Discord is linked in the bottom. Shoot me a message, hop into my Discord there. I'm happy to help with any tech questions that you have. But you know, hopefully this helps you guys get a little bit more immersive in iRacing and get you to a more real feel state. So thanks everybody for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, click that subscribe, and we'll catch you guys at the races.